be in my senior year studying natural resource management. Now, plants have been a very big, important part of my life for as long as I can remember. I spent most of my childhood running through the woods with a field guide in hand, looking up all the little plants on the forest floor that I could find. And then going home and digging up my parents' yard and trying to figure out what would grow best where, which they didn't necessarily appreciate, but I had fun, so all is well. So today, we are going to be talking about this particular plant, the cattail. Now, what exactly is a cattail? Does anyone know? Looks something like this. It's a plant! Yes! Nicely done! It is indeed a plant. This particular plant does grow within Cattail Reserve. Now, while we're together today, we are going to be going on a hike for about 4/10 of a mile, but it's not very far. If you need anything at all while we're out there, just let me know. We'll go from there. So yes, cattails. A cattail is a tall, reed-like plant that grows in wet areas. A cattail, should have put my hair up. A cattail likes to have its roots wet. It has to be in soil that's wet for the next part of the growing season. That's very, very important for them. Very important for them. Now here in Wisconsin, our native cattail is the broadleaf cattail. These plants can grow up to 9 feet tall. That's pretty tall if you ask me. And their leaves are long and sword-shaped, kind of like big pieces of grass. And they can be 1 to 2 inches wide on the broadleaf cattail. Cattail latifolia, or trifolatifolia, excuse me. Now, cattails can actually reproduce in a couple of different ways here in Wisconsin. You've all been familiarized with the cattail seed head. Now these seed heads explode during the winter time and fling their little baby seeds on the wind for as far as they can fly. Go really far sometimes, actually. Cattails also spread by rhizomes. Rhizomes are these horizontal roots that grow from the parent plant out, away from the other plant, and then they put down new roots and a new shoot. So that's how cattails can spread really, really, really fast in an area if they get nice and comfy. Now, cattails also flower in the early summer. The flowers look something like this. The top part of the flower is the male part, and that's where all of the pollen will be when the plant does go to pollen. This bottom part is the female part where the pollen falls onto, and that's what becomes more familiar cattail seed heads. The top part actually does fall off after a while, but it's no longer needed. So now that we know a little bit more about how to identify a cattail, let's take a walk over to the reflection pond and we will learn a little bit more about how cattails help out the local animals in Cattail Reserve. So while we're on our walk, be sure to use your ears and eyes to observe and try and see if you can discover any wildlife along the way. Let's go. Deer, yes, good job. Ducks, good observation. I did not see the ducks, I missed them. Ah, very good eyes, nicely done.
What?
So we
What
saw
did you
some
say?
deer and some ducks. I didn't see the ducks, I missed the ducks. That's all right. Now, if it had been warmer today, so maybe next week, you might have heard something that sounded like this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Birds.
Does anyone know what that sound is? No?
I want to be a chickadee.
It's a bird, you were right, it's a bird.
I want to be a chickadee because the chickadee goes, chickadee.
You are right. That particular noise was from a very common and very pretty red-winged blackbird. So red-winged blackbirds like to live in cattail marshes. You know it's really spring when you see the male red-winged blackbirds sitting on top of the old cattails screaming their little hearts out, letting everyone know that it is their territory and that you are in their territory. They will sometimes peck you in the head too, so you have to be careful of those. They are very, very challenging. Now, red-winged blackbirds also nest in the cattails. This is a female red-winged blackbird. her coloration is a lot different, right? Yeah, she blends in really, really well with the cattails.
I can't see it.
There you go. You see it?
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. So yes, the female red-winged blackbird builds her nest right in these cattails. So like the marsh behind us and along these edges here is exactly where the red-winged blackbird would build their nest. Now, why do you suppose they build in cattails? Any ideas? No? So cattails, oh, do you know?
It's a little bit more protected than on the crown of Syria.
Yes, because it is a protected area. Yes. So the blackbirds build in these cattails because, number one, the male can sit on top and see a whole bunch of different things coming. They can see predators. But the female sitting on the nest will definitely hear any sort of predators that are coming through that cattail stand. Very good. Yes. So another animal that really does like to live in cattails is going to be any sort of wetland bird. I should have put my hair up. Is any sort of wetland bird, waterfowl. So things like mallard ducks like to build their nests in around cattails because, again, it is a protected area. Another animal that really likes to live in cattails is a Canada goose. A Canada goose will actually also nest in amongst cattails for protection, but they also eat the cattails. They will eat the new shoots of the leaves as they're coming up, and they will also dig down in the water and eat those tasty rhizomes that we saw a picture of earlier. The rhizomes are actually full of starch, so it's a really good food source for a lot of different animals. And we have chickens. For a lot of different animals, such as the Canada goose. Now, other animals like amphibians really, really like cattails. Amphibians will actually lay their eggs in and amongst the cattail stalks to help add some structure for those particular eggs. Now, one of my all-time favorite animals is this guy right here, the American toad. Would you like to hear what a toad singing sounds like?
Yeah.
All right, this is an American toad.
I heard that sound before.
You did? So yes, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we will hear some of our American toad friends singing in this pond right here and in other wetland areas around this place. Now, if you see right here, these are actually American toad eggs. Yeah, right? So they lay their eggs in kind of strings. And the strings of eggs, let's pretend for a moment, let's use our imaginations. Let's say this rope right here is a string of American toad eggs. Now, if that female toad was to lay her eggs just along the edge in open water, it would be something like that. But then, what if a current came through or an animal walked by? Those eggs would go whoop and suddenly be in deep water. If those eggs are in deep water, they're not going to hatch into tadpoles. Tadpoles need it to be nice and warm and in shallow water, so when they hatch, they have lots of good food to eat. It's very important for baby tadpoles. So, instead, the mama toads will utilize cattails to help add structure to their eggs. Can I please get 3 volunteers? We got 1 and 2. You get 1 more?
Go, Mason, go.
Up there.
You can? Come on over. Thank you for helping. Okay, can I get you to stand right here? Perfect. Right in the middle. Perfect. Okay, you hang on to that. Now very gently twirl around once. Thank you. Just like that. Now you twirl around once as well. There we go. Twirl around once. Nicely done. Okay, hold still. You 3 are my fancy cattail stalks. And a mama toad has just gone and laid her eggs right around you. So now, if a current comes through, those eggs don't go anywhere. The cattails hold them tight in place. Thank you for helping me with the rooftop. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So yeah, toads, salamanders, frogs, anything like that will will utilize cattails to help stabilize their eggs and keep them protected before they hatch into the cute little tadpoles that swim around. Now, another animal that really, really likes cattails, and actually depends on cattails very, very much, is the muskrat. Have you ever seen a muskrat before?
No.
No? I think you have. Nice. Muskrats are adorable. I think they're super cute, and they depend very, very heavily upon cattail marshes. If you were here for Carter's program, you got to learn all about the amazing little muskrat and their cattails. So yes, cattails eat. Muskrats eat cattails a lot. They like to eat the stalks. They like to eat the rhizomes underneath the ground. They'll eat pretty much all of it if they really are hungry. Now, they also build their houses out of cattail stalks and leaves and mud. A muskrat house looks a lot like a little tiny beaver lodge. Very, very fun. Now actually, sometimes if you're lucky, you will see a muskrat house with a Canada goose nesting on the top of it. I haven't seen one yet this year, hopefully eventually when things warm up a little bit. Now, muskrats actually play a really important role in the Cattail Marsh. You can kind of see behind you here, there is a very dense stand of cattails. Now, cattails can get a little excited, and they're very prolific, and sometimes they overtake an area. Now, a muskrat will go in there, and they will eat their way through that big dense stand and open up new areas of water for things like ducks and other waterfowl to use, and also for other plants to be able to grow up, aquatic plants to grow up in that wetland area. So it's very important that muskrats are in the area to help the ecology of the wetland. Now, while muskrats are pretty cool and pretty good at taking care of keeping cattails in check so they don't overgrow, the cattails themselves actually work as a filter system for the marsh. So let's head just back up to the next juncture here, and we will talk a little bit more about that. So cattails, a cattail marsh. Here's our little pretend cattail marsh. Cattails act like water filters. Pretty cool, right? How does that work? So, say our cattail marsh is near a farming area, and there's a big heavy rain, and some of the extra nutrients and fertilizer, represented by this lovely bottle right here, is getting swept into the marsh area. Now, if there are cattails in that area, whoop, I need to put the bucket underneath it. There we go. We're good. We got the marsh. All right. So if there are cattails in the area, they will help to filter out that water and make it much better for the rest of the animals to utilize. So how does it do that? Cattails are really, really good. I overfilled that a little bit. It should be clearer than that. That's all right. My filter got messed up. Pretend it's clear. So cattails, when they come into contact with excess nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, they will take all that up into their roots and leaves and store that in their stems and leaves. So an area that would otherwise have a whole lot of excess phosphorus and or nitrogen suddenly doesn't. Now if cattails were not in that area, then excess phosphorus and nitrogen would cause a lot of algae growth. That's a problem. I'm sure you've all seen a pond that's just covered with algae, right? Plant a couple cattails in there and it'll help take care of that problem. Now there can be too much of a good thing though. Again, our cattail stands here are pretty dense, right? That's a lot of a monoculture. That's a lot of one single plant growing in an area. So again, that goes back to the muskrats. A muskrat would come in and clear out more areas like this so that other plants and animals could use that wetland. But what if there were no muskrats there? What would we do? Let's think on that. Oh, hold on to that thought, okay? Good job. Hold on to those thoughts. Think about that while we hike to our next location, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So did anyone come up with any ideas for what we can do if a cattail marsh is overgrown and has too many cattails. There were some ideas. Did you have an idea?
Yeah.
Yeah? What you got?
Put one in.
Fair. All right, cool. Any other ideas as to what we could do if a cattail marsh is too overgrown? What do you think could be done if a cattail marsh was overgrown?
Cut it down?
Cut it down! That's a good call. That's definitely an option. Nicely done. What you got?
There's a red wing blackbird right there.
Yes! It's up at the top of the tree there. Say hello, everyone! Thank you! So yes, there are actually a number of ways that we can control cattails if they are growing out of control. So this area right here is a little bit dense, right? There's a lot of cattails in here. Now typically, this is one of my favorite places in Schmeeckley Reserve because I think the cattails look gorgeous. It's a beautiful place any time of year. Even when it's cold and blowing and snowing in the springtime, it's supposed to be green. Close enough. Oh, right in my eye. All right. Now, the trouble here is that we actually have 3 different kinds of cattails growing in Schmeeckley Reserve. Our broadleaf cattail, which we talked about earlier, that's our native cattail to Wisconsin. We also have a narrow-leaved cattail. Now, the narrow-leaved cattail has leaves that are about 1/2 inch wide, and it is an introduced species and is considered to be very invasive. We also have a 3rd type of cattail, which is a hybrid between our native broadleaf and the introduced narrowleaf. Unfortunately, the hybrid is also considered to be an invasive species. The downside is that most of what we have in Schmeeckley Reserve is the hybrid and the introduced narrowleaf. So there are a number of things that we can do about that though. A cattail stand can be hand pulled. You can get right in there and rip them out by the roots. That's a lot of work. Would not recommend it. But if you have a smaller area, pulling them out might be one way to handle it. You can also burn it with a prescribed burn. Now, don't just go light a cattail marsh on fire, please. You have to pull proper permitting for things like that and work with a company that specializes in prescribed burns. But it is fairly effective for controlling an overpopulation of the invasive cattails. Now, the next thing we can do is to mow down that area. Now, you can mow it down with obviously specialized equipment that can handle the wetland area, but up in Manitoba, Canada, they're doing a bunch of research right now as far as mowing down the cattail marshes and collecting all of that extra biomass. With that extra biomass, they actually create pellets. So if you are familiar with a wood stove that burns pellets, these pellets are made out of cattail material. So this is a new form of biofuel. Now these pellets can be burned to produce heat, like to heat a home, or they can also be burned to help produce electricity. So there are actually a number of different things that we can do with cattail overgrowth. Now, when we talked about the muskrats before, muskrats and a whole bunch of birds like to use cattail fluff to line their nests. Now you can see most of the cattails in this area have already blown their seeds, right? There's not much left as far as what we are used to seeing with the actual cattails. But here, I have a bag of cattail fluff. So I'm going to pass this bag around so you can go ahead and touch it if you want. I'm going to take some of it though. So you can touch it if you want to, and then pass the bag around. It's nice and soft and warm. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
You haven't gotten it, okay. So cattail fluff, the cattails themselves are out in the fall. They eventually bust apart. Has anyone here seen a cattail head get busted apart? It's pretty cool. Would you all like to help me? Or at least one person even want to help me?
I'll help you.
You'll help? Okay.
I'll help.
Okay, I have 2 of them. Alright, so here, whoop, there we go. Here I have 2 cattails. We're gonna go on this side because of the way the wind is blowing. And do you want to hang on to that one? And do you want to hang on to that one? Okay, we are gonna try and bust these apart. Ready? So sometimes, oh, they're not going to explode, but sometimes they actually explode. You can use your hand and, you got it?
My exploded.
Yes, nicely done. So, you can see the cattail fluff will fly a long ways on the wind if it gets the opportunity to. Oh, it's coming back to get us. All right. So,
I'm stealing some fluff from the cattail.
cattail fluff has actually, let's line back up a little bit along the edge. I got excited there, terribly sorry about that. So historically, cattail fluff has been used by humans as a form of insulation. This is not made out of cattail fluff, but it gets the idea across. Now, First Nations people actually used cattail fluff to help line their moccasins and line bedding to help with warmth and softness. And it was really fairly effective. Now, what other things do you think cattail fluff could be used for? Do you know?
Bedding.
Bedding, good job. So actually, during World War II, cattail fluff was used in life jackets. So cattail fluff is buoyant and it's also waterproof. So I have this water right here. I will walk around with this. Thank you so much. So if I put water in here, a lot of water, all the water. There we go. I'm not going to drink it. It's a good question though. If I put that fluff in the water, it does not sink. I can try and try and try, but cattail fluff is buoyant and waterproof. See, this stuff can stay floating on top of the water for 100 hours. 100 hours! So this is why during World War II, the cattail fluff was actually used as a buoyant material in life jackets. When they didn't have much other choice, it worked out really pretty well. So, you had said cattail fluff could be used in blankets, right? Yeah!
And beds.
And beds, yes! So, cattail fluff can be used as a down alternative. I mean, if you felt it, it's warm. It's soft and warm. So yeah, you can use it to stuff pillows or jackets or bedding or things like that. But if you do that, please be aware. Number one, it is hard to wash. Very challenging to wash this stuff. Number two, it is extremely flammable. So if you use it to stuff something, please keep that item away from heat sources. It is very, very flammable. With that though, if you're out camping and can't get your campfire started, grab some cattail fluff and it works to help as tinder. It burns very hot, very, very quickly. So you need to add other stuff in there too, but it will definitely help get your fire started at your campfire. Now, with that, oh goodness. I remember my grandfather saying that you could light a cattail seed head on fire and then snuff it out, so it was like a giant incense stick, and he would use it to keep mosquitoes away. Has anyone tried this? I don't know if there's any truth to this or if he was just pulling my leg.
I've heard of it.
You have heard of it before? Awesome! Great, I'm gonna try it sometime this summer. I'm excited. So yeah, I have heard of that. Okay, thank you for helping verify that. I appreciate it. So in addition to, I know, I've got it all over me too. The downside to cattails is they're very messy. All right, so we talked about cattails can be used as biofuel and they can be used as insulation. They have insulative properties, flotation devices. But the one thing that I really think is very intriguing about cattails is that almost the entire plant is edible at some point during their growth cycle. So let's actually head back to the seeding area and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So like I said, cattails are almost the entire plant is edible at some point in time during its growing season. Now, First Nations peoples actually used cattails almost like a grocery store in the past because they have so many different applications. We talked about how their fluff is used for insulation, but also the leaves of a cattail are a really good medium for weaving. So, like weaving mats and baskets and things like that, the leaves are very, very useful for that. And like I said, almost the entire plant is edible. Remember how we talked about these rhizomes before? That the muskrats and the geese like to eat? Yeah, good stuff, right? We can eat those too. So these cattail rhizomes can be collected in the fall and winter, and they are completely chock full of starch. So a lot of people equate them to like potatoes. So these can be harvested, and they need to be either boiled or pan fried. And then you peel off the outside of it so you have just the nice white inside. And then that good starchy root is very high in carbohydrates and is good to eat. The only challenge with this is that these roots are also very fibrous, so the texture is not quite right. It's not like mashed potatoes in the respect of the way it feels, so might not be so nice to eat. It's just one of those things that if you need carbohydrates, that's gonna do it for you. The next part of the plant that we'll talk about is the stalk right here. The very bottom of the stalk can be harvested in late spring when it's had some chance to grow. Now this stalk, you peel it, bleed it off, and peel it down so that the white pith is left, and then you cook it up kind of like asparagus, and it is supposed to be a nice, sweet vegetable. This is something I really want to try sometime. I will add a caveat here. So, remember how we talked about cattails are good water filters for water systems? Yeah, that's great for the Cattail Marsh area. Not so good for us if we are eating those plants. So if you do decide to forage for plants, for cattails for eating, please be sure to take them from an area of clean water. You don't want to be taking them from roadside ditches or things like that, because the toxins that that plant has taken up over time bioaccumulates. So its tissues are going to be full of all those excess nutrients. You don't want to eat that. One more caveat. Here in Schmeeckley Reserve, this is a nature reserve, so we're not allowed to actually harvest any sort of plants here in the reserve. But if you have your own property and have your own wetland, or maybe a neighbor does or something, yes, go for it. Definitely give this stuff a try. Super cool. The next part of the plant we'll talk about is that flower. So early on, when the flowers first come out in the early summer, this top part, where the pollen gets made later, the top part is going to be green and fairly smooth. When it is in that particular life stage, you can just pluck it right off, boil it for a few minutes, and eat it like mini sweet corn. Now evidently it does taste like earthy sweet corn. Not something I have tried yet, but I look forward to it. So yes, the top part of the pollen can be eaten like sweet corn. Now when that flower does go to pollen, it looks something like this. There's the pollen flower, and there's what will be the cattail. Now this pollen can actually be used for baking. So evidently the easiest way to harvest the pollen is to put a paper bag over the plant, just shake it. It's also recommended that if you collect pollen that you sieve it through a screen before utilizing it to get out any extra little bugs and such. Don't want to be, I mean, maybe you want the extra protein, that's fine, whatever. But I would recommend putting it through a screen to get rid of anything extra in there. Now, cattail pollen can be added to baked goods. It can't fully substitute for wheat flour because it doesn't have any sort of the glutinous stickiness that wheat flour has, but you can definitely add it to baked goods to add extra protein to those baked goods. It's a pretty cool thing. I appreciate it. So there are so many different ways that this one plant can be utilized. Who would have thought? Something that we see almost every day to the point where it just blends into the landscape is super duper useful. So we talked today about how plants and animals use cattails for food and shelter. Cattails can help to filter water for us and keep the wetlands. Yeah, do you have a question?
I think that's like
that's not super edible? You could try, but I would not recommend it. Good question though. So yes, cattails have a lot of foraging properties for us as humans, which is pretty cool. And again, they can be used for things like insulation, fire starting stuff, and biofuel. So while cattails may be as common as corn dogs at the state fair, they really have some amazing applications, and they provide a structural system for the animals in wetlands that I had no idea about before, but they're so